Welcome to Module 3. This module is all about action and engagement. In this first lesson, we're going to talk about priorities, specifically what it means to intelligently select your priorities. Let's dive in.
All right, ladies. So let's just take a deep breath to start off Module 3. And I'll just do a quick recap of what we talked about in the last two modules, just in case something bubbles up, an insight or a question. So, of course, our first module is called Excuses and Willpower. And the first thing we talked about is how we often think we're the problem because we know better than we're doing, and we have tools, but we're not using them. But I wanted to remind you, or maybe better said, start the conversation about the fact that tools and knowledge in and of itself is not transformational. So you're not the problem, those thoughts are the problem. And then we got into the fact that although those aren't transformational, transformation is possible. And then we had that powerful conversation about growth versus fixed mindset. And then we ended Module 1 talking about the language of life, how life shows up or is trying to get our attention through discomforts, whether it's physical, whether it's cravings, whether it's emotional. And those discomforts are not problems unless you think they are. So we wanted to relabel them correctly as being messengers trying to get your attention about an actual problem, or better said, an imbalance, so you can bring your life into balance. And then we talked about, in Module 2, the 4 quadrants of life. So we realized that excuses are just messengers. They're not the problem. What our culture tries to do is say excuses are the problem, and willpower, in whatever form it takes, whether it's accountability or discipline or motivation, doesn't matter what words you use, willpower is the solution. But obviously we keep doing that vicious cycle, so something must be off. So we realized excuses fall under the category of messenger. Willpower would be a temporary relief, a Band-Aid. But the real problem is that we are not spending enough time here. So our excuses are trying to get our attention about this, that we're doing the vicious 180, V180, instead of spending time here. Then we talked about rich conversations, the fact that I was going to give you really no answers. And everyone was sad. No, I shouldn't say that. But that we're used to having someone else give us our answers because we are used to hanging out here. But no one can tell you what is you. No one can tell you what is inspired. We can give suggestions. We can talk about tools and tips and processes, and we're going to do that more and more. But ultimately, you have to decide. And even more to the point, not only are we just having a conversation here, but life is constantly having a conversation with you. And you get to decide how deep that conversation is. You can be conversing with life from this paradigm, or you can be conversing with life from this paradigm. It doesn't force you to converse at a certain level. You get to decide. It shows up here. You get to decide where you meet it. And along those lines with the rich conversations, we talked about how that's ever evolving, how this is not a state of being. This is a process and a practice. And everybody, including, of course, myself, hangs out here at different times. And this is just about practicing more and more being here. And that's a process, but it's a process worth embarking on because life's a long time, like we ended the last lesson on. And when we start to practice things that are functional, a lot can change a lot more quickly than we expect because we've been practicing dysfunction for so long. So take a breath on that, ladies. So now we're going to bring this all together. We're going to have some rich conversations about processes and practices when it comes to engagement, bondage, and disengagement today. And we're going to start here with engagement. So one of my favorite quotes from Waldo Emerson is, "Your actions speak so loudly, I cannot hear what you're saying." So we know that from our conversations last night that life really is, crafting your life consists of your perspectives and the actions you take. Both are important. So when we're talking about engagement here, we're going to be talking about action. Oof. So engagement is action. And that action comes in the currency of time or money. Another way to put that would be engagement's form is time or money. The way that you can engage is either through those two main forms. Now, I want to make something really clear right away. What Tal Ben-Shahar says is, as larger numbers of people come to perceive material wealth as an end in itself, and thus as more individual members of society are, let me restart that. As larger numbers of people come to perceive material wealth as an end in and of itself, and thus as more individual members of society are unhappy, society as a whole nears a state of emotional bankruptcy. So what I want to highlight there is that when we think that money is something worth attaining in and of itself, we become emotionally bankrupt. Money is a currency of engagement. Numbers in your bank account do nothing unless you flow it towards an experience. You flow it towards something important to you. Okay, so the pursuit of money in and of itself, it is really a vicious cycle that you can get into. When you use your money to engage with something that feels important, that's a whole different story. And so I think that's what Tal Ben-Shahar is saying here. We, as a culture, are becoming emotionally bankrupt because we see wealth as something worth attaining just for the sake of wealth. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what is called superwoman, or we can just call it superperson syndrome. And you brought this up a little bit last night. You said, let me see if I can rephrase it, or summarize it. It was like, you feel like in our culture, women are supposed to look a certain way, but we aren't supposed to have to delegate time or money in order to do that. Or that's the perception. It should be effortless. And I thought that was a really great point. And this is what we're going to talk about here a little bit and go beyond it as well. So because our culture values this quadrant, we value this idea of superwoman or superhuman. And I certainly valued it. I thought being responsible was just being as efficient as you could be and getting as much done as you could, and not sleeping that much, and packing my schedule. And that is until I read this quote from Joshua Rosenthal. Liberated from the confinement of traditional female roles, with increasing opportunities to explore areas once exclusively for men, modern women frequently end up leading chronically stressful lives as they struggle to balance all their options. They want to be successful in business, have a great marriage, beautiful children, a dynamic figure with a flat belly, involve themselves in the arts, and maybe run for office one day. Phew, just thinking about it makes me stressed out. I know many women who suffer from superwoman syndrome, trying to maintain this stressful lifestyle and then wondering why it's not making them happy. I'm a great believer in encouraging people to slow down. I understand why women want to explore all the possibilities open to them, having been denied them for so long. And I admire those who manage to do so. But sooner or later, anyone who maintains such a high-powered lifestyle, man or woman, is bound to see that an intelligent selection of priorities is required. Courage is also needed to stand up and say, okay, everyone, you can pass me on the fast track to success. I've tasted it. I understand it. I'm no longer interested in keeping up because I know that the price is too high. I want to stay true to myself. I want to enjoy myself. These are my priorities. So what really stands out to me in that quote is intelligent selection of priorities. We go from thinking you have to do it all to taking your power back a little bit and deciding, I get to decide what my priorities are. And so with that being said, let's talk about what it means to have an intelligent, or what it means to intelligently select your priorities. So it's kind of a big conversation, and we're going to start this conversation with the big rocks analogy. Maybe some of you have seen this. It's got some awesome music behind it that we'll just let play. So we'll watch this and then we'll chat. So maybe you get the point. The point being, if we aren't clear about what our priorities are and we don't prioritize them, put them first, the rest of life is going to get in the way. So obviously, the first time around, the sand and the pebbles were put in first, and then the big rocks didn't fit. And the second time around, put the big rocks in first, and everything fit. Now, we're going to explore this a little more because I don't think it's a be-all, end-all for intelligent selection of priorities. First and foremost, what are the big rocks is the question that comes to me. And then secondly, I like the idea that we don't have to fit in everything that we're doing right now. We can, sorry. Totally. Yeah, no worries. No worries. I don't like the idea that we have to, everything that we're doing now has to fit in. We're going to talk about ways to liberate some of these pebbles and sand. But I think it's a good starting point, and it certainly makes a point. But let's talk now about what those big rocks might be. And to do that, oh yeah, I like this quote. When you know what's important, it's a lot easier to ignore what's not. So to start off here, talking about what those big rocks might be, let's chat about Stephen Covey's 4 quadrants. So you can see here he has important on the top, not important on the bottom, urgent on the left, and not urgent on the right. So what Stephen Covey used to talk about is that quadrant 2 is the quadrant of truly successful people. Quadrant 2 is the quadrant of proactive people. It's the quadrant of effective people. I believe his book was titled 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So you can see in quadrant 2, you're spending time on things that are important but not urgent. So some of the things that he listed are planning and preparation, prevention, values clarification, exercise, relationship building, and true recreation and relaxation. Quadrant 1 is important and urgent. He calls this the management quadrant. So these are things like crises, medical emergencies, pressing problems, deadline-driven projects, and last-minute preparations. He calls quadrant 3 the quadrant of avoidance, also the quadrant of deception. So this is not important, but it's urgent. So this is people interrupting you, maybe emails coming in that you're engaging with, quote-unquote pressing matters. And then not urgent and not important, the quadrant of waste and avoidance, calls this trivial work, busy work, junk mail, time wasters. It's mindless stuff. It's escaping. That'll be on the blooper reel, guys. So this is a great place to start. Big rocks could be quadrant 2. And he labels it too the quadrant of quality and personal leadership. But when I was really diving into what these big rocks might be, this again felt like a nice thing to think about, but it didn't quite get there for me. I was still wondering, what are the big rocks? And so the question that came to me to help me sort it out for myself was, what is it that no person on the face of the earth could automate? What would it be? Automate? Could automate, outsource, or let go of, and still be a happy and healthy human. So meaning it's literally impossible for you to outsource it or automate it, or if you let go of it, it just would be impossible for you to be happy or healthy. So I did a lot of brain dumps on this, listed tons of stuff out, and then slowly came to what I believe are the 9 big rocks of life. And I love Mary Oliver's quote. She says, "Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life." And so maybe this is what we could do with it. The first one I'll mention, and these are in no particular order, but considering the title of our conversation here, the first one we'll mention is exercise and physical activity. So you can't pay someone else to do your push-ups. You can hire a trainer to help you do your push-ups, but there's absolutely no way that you can automate or outsource exercise. You have to do it yourself. You could let go of it, but it would have a significant impact on your health and happiness. So considering those 2 facts, exercise and physical activity become one of life's big rocks. And I would include in here things like body work, so massage and acupuncture, things like that, whatever you choose. So we could call this body work too. Second big rock, what you consume. This is food, drink, and information. You could also include, of course, medication, supplements, things like of that nature. Someone can go grocery shopping for you, someone can cook your meal, but you can't have someone eat your meal. Someone can, of course, tell you you need to drink water, remind you to, but you've got to drink the water. And the same goes for information. You decide what you consume in regards to your info. Good job drinking some water. Next, third big rock, rest. You can't tell someone, hey, can you go take a nap for me, please? I'm really tired. And of course, if you're not resting, it has huge impact on your health and happiness. Fourth, your relationships with people. So here I would think of anywhere from your coworkers to your intimate partners, friendships, and potentially your spouse. And the reason I throw them all in one category is because it's been my observation that although those relationships look very differently, the quality of them kind of is pervasive throughout. So if you feel pretty good about your social life, you usually feel pretty good about your marriage. There's different dips and stuff, but I've found that usually if you're practicing quality relationships, regardless of how intimate they are, that quality is going to generalize to all of them. And of course, you can't outsource this. You can't tell someone, hey, could you have a really great conversation with my husband today? I just don't have time. You got to do it yourself. And if you're not focusing on it, health and happiness will significantly decline. Fifth big rock, spirituality. And I love the way Brene Brown defines spirituality. She says, it is recognizing and celebrating that we are all intrinsically connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and a purpose in our lives. Sixth big rock, your stuff and style. So you can have a stylist help you pick out clothes, but you've got to wear the clothes, right? You can have someone help you organize your stuff, but ultimately, day in and day out, you've got to have a relationship with your stuff. Some people have a relationship with their stuff where they feel completely overwhelmed, like their stuff has got out of control, it's bigger than them. Other people have a relationship with their stuff where they appreciate it, they see its value, they appreciate its beauty, they see how it contributes to their life, they see how it's a reflection of them. So their stuff is a reflection of them instead of them responding to their stuff in an overwhelmed way. So your stuff and style is big, and again, you can outsource help with it, but your day in and day out experience, every single person on the planet, that's their big rock. And style, of course, goes along with that. Seventh big rock is your emotions. Can't outsource it. Can't say, hey, could you be sad for me today? I'm really sick of it. Eighth big rock is play. Of course, you can't tell someone, would you have fun for me today? I don't have time for it. And I love, some people might beg to differ that this isn't absolutely necessary, especially in our culture, so focused on work and production. But I love these two perspectives. Once again, from Brene Brown, she says, drawing on his own research, as well on the latest advances in biology, psychology, and neurology, Dr. Stuart Brown explains that play shapes our brain, helps us foster empathy, helps us navigate complex social groups, and is at the core of creativity and innovation. And directly from Dr. Stuart Brown, he says, the opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression. Respecting our biologically programmed need for play can transform work. It can bring excitement and newness to our job. Play helps us deal with difficulties, provides a sense of expansiveness, promotes mastery of our crafts, and is an essential part of the creative process. Most important, true play that comes from our own inner needs and desires is the only path to finding lasting joy and satisfaction in our work. In the long run, work does not work without play. And on the topic of work, the final big rock is your influence and impact. So this, of course, could be your work, your career. And I love Marianne Williamson's quote, "A career is not separate from who you are, it's an extension of who you are." And maybe we could say a career is not intended to be separate from who you are, it's intended to be an extension of who you are. Because in our culture, that not a lot of people are experiencing that truth, but that's the goal. Now, so your influence and impact could be your work, but it's also things like how you interact with the waiter at the restaurant, how you interact with people. Do you open the door for people? Do you smile at people? So it doesn't have to fit into the box of work. It's literally how are you impacting and influencing people. Now, on the topic of work, what I have noticed is that when your work is primarily falling into this category, when your influence and impact is primarily falling into this category, which for a lot of people that's the case because of how much they work, that's going to feel like production and resentment. When we can get our influence and impact in this category, it feels like appreciation and creation. So that's how you can have a gauge of whether or not it's falling into this category. Production and resentment, appreciation and creation. Now, maybe you don't know what to do about your work right now. But one thing you can do is remember that influence and impact isn't in the box. We don't have to contain it in the work box. So once again, as I mentioned, your influence and impact can be how you're interacting with people on a daily basis. So you could start to become very aware of that. How am I treating the person checking me out at the grocery store? Am I noticing that they're human? Am I making eye contact? Am I complimenting them on something? And suddenly you get bits and pieces of your influence and impact going here. So you're baby stepping your way to one day, someday, engaging with your work from this quadrant. But if you don't know how to get there yet, start with other ways that you influence and impact people.
And Alicia,
yeah.
will you repeat the two when it's in
Yeah.
completion?
I'll write them out too.
It's in production and...
So when your influence and impact is hanging out mostly here, or when it is hanging out here, you're going to feel like, you're going to feel resentment. And you're going to feel like you're just producing. It's about production, getting to your job and doing it. When it's here, it feels like creation. And it feels like appreciation. Joshua Rosenthal says, find work you love or find a way to love the work you have. And I love this because he's acknowledging that perspective, and number one, that our life, is, as we've talked about, is made up of perspective and action, and that they play off each other. This is an art. It's not a science. It's not do this thing about perspective and then take this action and then step 3 is bring them together or something like that, you know? This is an art. These play off of each other. And so what I love here is he's saying, find work you love. Maybe you take a different action. Maybe it's time for a job change. But if you can't, it's worth it to find a way to love the work you have.
There you go. Now you know the 9 big rocks of life, the 9 things that are absolutely worth your engagement. In the next lesson, we're going to shine a light on something goofy that's happening in our culture, and that is that we seem to value some of these big rocks more than others, even though they're all equally important. To tune into that conversation, head over to the next video, Module 3, Lesson 2.